Okay, hi everybody. I'm Eric Rickenberger. Today is Tuesday, April 24th. Welcome to your weekly Kubernetes SIG testing meeting. We don't really have anything on the agenda today, so we just sort of started having a discussion about sort of measuring API coverage and what the best way to do that is, where the best touch points are within our test infra stack to kind of hook that stuff up and just, yeah. So, Hippie, you said you had kubeadm set up, but Tim, you expressed concerns that the majority of our clusters aren't necessarily set up through kubeadm. And then we started talking about how we weren't really sure the best place or format for results and how we might analyze those. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, so the TLDR, to summarize, to augment a little bit, is that he enabled the webhook for audit logging, which allows you to push the audit logs to wherever you want to, which is super useful for a lot of use cases. And you need to specify the format of how you want it to go. But the question is, if we were to enable this for test infra, where that data would be stored and how it would be accessed and retrieved from a test infra perspective. So,
how much data are we talking about?
It's every API call that's made to the API server. So there's 2 points. One, we can go and enable the API log on the API server where we can reach it. And another approach is what I'm working on now, is enabling an audit webhook so that we have some centralized place where all of the API calls across all of our tests are aggregated, and we can have some interesting test results or interesting data to work with. And my questions are, kubeadmin was just another tool I was working on. Where within test infra would we try to inject parameters to API server to enable audit logging and audit webhook? Where would we want that data if we did?
Probably somewhere, something involving kubetest with setting up those jobs. We'll want to configure that. So we have a lot of different. I would say the ideal situation would be like enabling that for certain jobs that we schedule, and then having kubetest dump that into the artifacts directory. We upload a lot of things like other log files or JUnit results to that directory. If you can get kubetest to dump it there, we upload everything that's in there.
you can specify the parameters to the API server to dump an audit log in a well-defined location if you wanted to.
Right, but that'll be on the master, right? So we'll still need to copy it back.
We can do that.
Yeah, so we just need to make sure that kubetest grabs whatever that well-defined location is.
Right, and we already do that for a number of the providers, but like I kind of personally wanted to back up real quick. So was the idea that like this audit logging mechanism was seen as sort of a better way to get coverage versus like snooping API traffic the way we were with like a man-in-the-middle proxy?
Yeah, I went down the snooping route because it felt that we could inject it upon all the pods, but it felt the feedback I got was just kind of clunky. And I was trying to do something a bit cleaner. But the trade-off is we do have to modify stuff on the API server, and that cuts us out of doing a few things on providers that we can't, modify.
Right. So like we couldn't do GKE, right? Or
yeah.
You could. You can actually. You could. Well, there's a provision that people are wanting to make for dynamic webhook changes. So long as you had admin ACLs, you could basically have the ability to stub in and override to put that webhook on any provider. As long as the API machinery folks agree to some of those proposals, which there already is precedent for some of this stuff. So it doesn't seem too far-fetched that this is coming and it will happen, because there's already proposals around it.
Okay, but I do agree with Ben that like the general pattern we follow for producing test artifacts is just dump them in the artifact directory first, for each run, and then we can have something that later goes through and iterates through the Google Cloud buckets and like aggregates those separately, right? So that's how we have jobs that push into GCS, and then we have Kettle listening over PubSub, I think, to understand when things are pushed into GCS, and it scrapes from GCS and pushes into BigQuery. So you could see maybe something similar happening for just viewing or aggregating API coverage data across a variety of test runs.
Yep, pretty much we try to get things into cold storage, and then from there we can reprocess it to whatever we need.
Should I look into where the kubetest hooks are for initializing those providers now? Like if there's drop a link or something to where I might do that, and then on the an output, that's all within kubetest.
Yeah, I mean, so basically it's kind of just hooking up, showing out to the other providers. So like with KubeADM, it's using Kubernetes Anywhere. So you'll want to plumb through to Kubernetes Anywhere, wherever that actually configures the relevant things.
I may be asking a lot of junior questions, but is there a place we can get together for a deep dive at some point? Or because it's complex.
Yeah, well, so there's actually going to be a little bit of one at KubeCon
Okay.
that Sen and Cole are doing, but I don't know that it's actually going to touch on like kubetest. It's kind of hard to do a deep dive because it's a lot of things.
Are you going to be at the Contributor Summit?
I'm not making it to KubeCon this time. But
Maybe Hacker.
that's
Are you
okay.
gonna?
Yeah.
You'll be there.
I'll be.
I can answer some of the questions. I can't answer some of the test info ones in detail as Ben could, but I can like point you at locations of where I know where the bodies lie.
I'm probably somewhere in the middle, and assuming I get my flight booked correctly, I will also be at Contributor Summit. I've had to send it back 2 times now, so there are times.
If you have questions though, and you can, I don't know, write them somewhere, I'm happy to answer them or forward you to the people that can.
Oh, thanks, Ben.
Even just like an issue on test info would work.
Yeah, sorry, I just joined the call a little late, but I'll be at KubeCon too if I can help there somehow.
Cool. Are you going to be at the Contributor Summit, Cole?
Is that on Tuesday?
Yes.
No, I won't be there in time.
All right. Yeah, that's what I'm fighting with. Right now my flight shows up Tuesday afternoon. I'm trying to push it back a little bit if I can. Okay, so do you feel like at a high level you sort of, so I guess at a high level, like where are we going with this coverage data? How is this going to hook into the ongoing conformance test efforts? Because I gather like Mithra introduced some of the folks who are working on the conformance tests today, but I don't know like how we're using coverage data to help inform what they're working on.
I don't think we are yet. Coverage data is in like a super early state. There is some existing tooling that I believe goes the snooping route, and there was a there was a doc discussing doing more of that across all the providers. I might be able to dig that out.
Our initial proof of concept was an MITM proxy that was pulling the logs out.
Okay.
But I hadn't started the aggregation portion of it.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, I know for now, like one of the questions that came up was about there seemed to be some workload tests that were still using the V1 Beta 1 workload API instead of the V1 workload API. Mm-hmm. And like, I know in general, like there's an intent to make sure that any API that's V1, we gotta have coverage on that. So we roughly know like what code needs to be worked on, but coverage is gonna help us inform that a lot more. But one of the questions that raised for me is like, if we make a blanket policy of always saying, look, just test V1, it's stable, it's out the door, everything should be talking to V1. technically speaking, V1 Beta 1 still needs to be supported for some amount of time due to our deprecation policy. And I don't know like how we would mandate or enforce that we have sufficient coverage across both of those APIs. Like it kind of feels a little dirty to me.
I'm of the mind that everything that's V1 Beta 1 should eventually be promoted to V1. And I think if they're doing work right now, working from V1 backwards makes the most sense. Because there's plenty of things that will be promoted still to V1, which we know does not have sufficient coverage.
Right, but just so for example, if I suddenly say, hey, all of the tests that currently talk to V1 Beta 1 for workloads, I'm moving them all to talk to V1 from now on. But that now means I have like no coverage of the V1 Beta 1 thing.
You have all the existing test suite coverage that existed for the previous rendition, right? They do the SKU testing across one rendition, and it's two renditions to deprecate the groups. So it's always been a +2 policy from my vantage point, because I've been bitten by it so many goddamn times. Sorry, that the every 2 renditions they can deprecate across 2. So like if you did V1 Beta 1 in like 1.9, by 1.11 it would be dead and just be V1, right? So they'll have a window of time where they'll support both, and then one after that it's gone. So it doesn't matter to me. I think from their perspective and spinning up folks to get coverage, just focusing on V1 is totally sufficient. And by the time we get to the point where any APIs are not fully V1, we can address those piecemeal about what needs to be done. And that should be done by SIG architecture, right?
So two releases sounds really aggressive to me, because if I understand what you're saying, we moved a bunch of the workload APIs to V1 back in like last KubeCon, right? December. We were sitting there all loud and proud about how, hey, look, deployments are finally V1. Does that mean the release that's being worked on right now is ripping out all the old V1 Beta 1 workload stuff?
I'm not going to say it's consistent, because it's not, but that has been the standard operating procedure that I've seen across releases. And like the reason I know this is because I have tooling that exercises every single release that qualifies versions and gets every single resource object, right? So that's just what I've seen.
Okay. No, like I personally am totally fine with a policy that's like, look, as soon as we have a more stable API available, all code should be pointed at that more stable API.
And you got one release to transition yourself, right? You have one release where you support both. And then the next release after that, you only support the new.
Yeah, I just don't want to be in a situation where we have to make sure we have testing coverage of both APIs. That's all.
I don't think we should ever, but the test suites should support the version that it releases with. And because we have 3 releases that we support, you're always in a stable version for the test suite. So the way it works is the suite for the given series will test the coverage for that series, right? And so long as they're upgrading the coverage to only support V1 APIs, that means that suite for that series will be accurate, right? As long as they're not trying to do SKU testing across the series. If they do that, then they're in some weird, then we need to do some like if then elsing in the tests, right? And that's not, that'd be weird.
Okay. That makes sense to me. Maria, you said you had one more comment?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I didn't want to interrupt before. So only wanted to share with you where we're consolidating the things that we're working on. So Mitra shared with us like a list of endpoints to work with, and she sort of said which was the priority and which were needed for double click on conformance. So Mayank picked the priority class, and I picked namespace. So he created one, well, actually he and I, both of us, created one GitHub issue per API group. So our target would be to have a GitHub issue as if it was an Epic link to join all the PRs on that iteratively, like little additions. And once we know that we are fine with that API group, we can close the GitHub issue. So we are using that. We're learning a lot on the process. We were able to do a PR. Ben helped us a lot. And we have now to seek for feedback, right? It's we need to know if it makes sense to test API REST-like behavior. Like I list what's on the resource. There's nothing, or whatever it was there before. Then I post something, so I see that that resource is there. When I delete it, it's not there anymore, and things like that. Or a deep down on some more complex scenarios. So pretty much that's our first PR for Mayank and I. So we're seeking for feedback, right, to recalibrate how to construct better scenarios. So it's only to give you a context on what are the things that we're working on.
So when you create the PR, I do have feedback immediately. When you create the PR, to at the proper team, so that way the people have visibility. Because sometimes there are literally, how many, 3,400 issues and PRs in total. So the label alone will not get sufficient eyeballs sometimes on it. You need to at the team when you create an issue in order for it to get proper eyeballs on it, so that way at least somebody can route it properly. Once the routing occurs and the right people are plugged into the issue, we'll probably get better feedback faster. So that's the first thing that I can see, because I haven't looked through your PRs yet.
I think one other potential place to get good feedback is before you actually go through the trouble of writing all the test code, do you have like a test plan that you can present to either the SIG that owns that feature or potentially SIG architecture to get a good idea of whether or not you are, generating, like before you spend time writing the code, are you about to write meaningful test cases, or are there some things where it's not worth the effort to write that code? Are there places where you're missing meaningful test cases, that sort of stuff? What's the sort of process you're going through to review that before writing code?
Sure, thanks for the question. And what we have now, it's a short test plan on actually this spreadsheet that I've just shared. So as you said, right, we wrote like 6 scenarios, or 4. Mayank, I think he wrote 4. Not the whole super huge thing to waste our time in something that is not relevant, but big enough to have an understanding of which is the mindset for the test. So we're seeking for recalibration and seeing if we're on the good path for that, or we should discard that. So that's pretty much where we're standing now.
I think what both Aaron and I are harping on or trying to suggest is that we need a process in place to loop you guys in to the right people to give you signal back properly. And the process that Aaron was mentioning, as well as I, was to socialize first with your test plan with SIG-ARC, and then when you create the PRs and issues, to CC the appropriate teams according to what domain they are covering. Because like you might have some that would be API machinery, some might be SIG apps, some might be different areas of the project, because it's a very large project. So without that, when you blindly put up an issue in a PR, it goes into the ether, right? There's no one to receive it on the other side all the time.
Okay, I take that. Thank you.
Okay, cool. That basically brings us to the end of our half hour here. Any last minute questions, comments, concerns? Okay, cool. Well, I look forward to seeing some of you next week. I will probably be at the Contributor Summit on Tuesday, and then I will be at KubeCon for the whole conference. Shout out for my talk, which is the Wednesday of the conference. You know what? It would really help if I had the schedule for this stuff in front of me. I believe my talk is Wednesday immediately after the keynotes, and the SIG testing deep dive, which is going to be presented by Cole Wagner and Sen Liu, is going to be Friday 2 to 2:35. So looking forward to seeing you all there. Happy Tuesday, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Same to you.